Thank you, David. I really feel it's a great privilege to talk to you today, to be here in Jerusalem, and to honor these wonderful men that we've been talking about, David Flusser, Robert Lindsay, and Shmuel Safrai. And so this evening what I'd like to do is talk about one of the ideas that my father, Robert Lindsay, had as a result of his study, and one of his ideas was the teaching style of Jesus. But before we do this, besides my sister Debbie and myself being here, my sister Barbara wanted to be represented, Barbara Lassiter, and so she offered to draw a picture. She is the artist in the family. Debbie the musician, and Barbara's the artist. So she is the one who did the artwork for us. I would like to talk about the story of Mary and Martha and the incident that happened in Martha's house from Luke chapter 10. But I will give you first a little bit of background, because what I'm talking about is a theory that Lindsay had, and the story will be used as an illustration of the proposal that he had for reconstructing original context and format for Jesus' teaching. Robert Lindsay discovered what he considered to be Jesus' teaching format. As Jesus moved about the country in his peripatetic ministry, whenever he observed something of interest or someone asked a question, he would comment on the incident or question and follow with a teaching discourse. Jesus then concluded his teaching with two parables. Lindsay termed these twin parables, or sometimes they're referred to as double parables. He stated, and I quote from the Jerusalem Perspective, November-December 1992 edition, "I believe that Jesus normally employed twin parables in his teaching. These double parables usually concluded his teaching discourses and served to emphasize whatever point or points he was making in his teaching. I think it's now possible to identify the partner parables and to place them in their original context." Jesus, like many other rabbis of his time, traveled the country with his disciples. He was teaching along the way. His teaching came directly from the life situations that they encountered daily. His teaching often began with the phrase, "I tell you," and concluded with two parables. These parables illustrated and confirmed the teaching. A brief discussion of Robert Lindsay's stemma for the transmission of the gospel material will serve as a background for reconstructing the story of Mary and Martha and to illustrate Jesus' teaching method. Yesterday, David Biven and Hal Ronning both gave some very helpful information that I hope you can use as background to understand where Robert Lindsay was coming from as he went into this idea of Jesus' teaching method. His research, while attempting to translate the Synoptic Gospels from Greek into Hebrew, led him to believe that there was an original Hebrew biography of the life of Jesus. This Hebrew biography was translated into Greek in an appendix to his book, actually a book written by Lindsay called Jesus, Rabbi and Lord, has this appendix called Our Reconstructing Editor, where Lindsay states, the first reconstruction or recreated story, which was a short continued story of the life of Jesus, built on the reorganized scroll. The reorganized scroll was the result of an editor who decided to put together all the narrative incidents he found in the Greek biography, then all the teaching sections he found in individual stories, and finally all the parables, many of which were twin parables. To do this, he was obliged to separate the materials found in a number of longer stories and classify them as, number 1, incident, 2, teaching, and 3, parables. The author of the reorganized scroll joined incident to incident, teaching to teaching, and parable to other parables. We know the reorganized scroll only through the study of Luke, who preserves the doublets, that is, parallel text. Luke gives us a text that can easily be translated back to Hebrew. He tends to retain Hebrew word order and Hebraisms. Now, this is a quote from Lindsay. Luke used first Reconstruction plus the reorganized scroll. Mark used Luke almost exclusively, but occasionally takes from the reorganized scroll, revising it by making changes in wording, as he also does with Luke. Matthew used the anthology and Mark, but did not know Luke's text. Now, this is kind of summary of what you've already heard, and hopefully will give a little background to where we go from here. Lindsay reconstructed some of the incident teaching twin parable units. These reconstructions can be found in the book by Robert Lindsay, Jesus, Rabbi, and Lord, the Hebrew story of Jesus behind our Gospels, which was published in 1990. However, it is currently out of print, but will very soon, I hope very soon, be available online at JerusalemPerspective.com. David Biven has compiled these reconstructions of the twin parables in connection with the incident and teaching discourses, and have come up with about 16 units, and I believe a couple of them are his own. There are currently, actually you should be able to find these reconstructions, these examples, online on Jerusalem Perspective at this time. 1/3 of Jesus' words in the Gospels are in parables. And though he was an expert in using parables, he was not the first to employ this method of teaching. Parables were typical of rabbinic literature, especially of rabbinic Pharisaic movement. And as Dr. Flusser has stated, and I quote, "They do not exist in any anterior or posterior civilization, not even in the Jewish scriptures, Dead Sea Scrolls, Apocrypha, or Pseudepigrapha." Brad Young gives us many examples of the use of parables by ancient rabbis in his books. Jesus and His Jewish Parables, Rediscovering the Roots of Jesus' Teaching, 1989, and his book, The Parables, Jesus' Jewish Tradition and Christian Interpretation, which was published in 1998. His extensive examples help us understand what the parables meant to those who were listening to Jesus' teachings, and thus what truths of God Jesus was trying to convey. The context was Jewish, the audience was Jewish, and the culture was Jewish. And the language of the parables is never Aramaic. It is always Hebrew. So what is the purpose of the parables? What was the significance of teaching in parables? Why did the rabbis use this method? Why did Jesus employ this method so extensively in his teaching? As I said, 1/3 of his words are in parables. As Young says, intimately related to the context of the message, the parable illustrates a truth by way of comparison, and its message often has moral implications. Thus, an abstract truth of God becomes concrete, it becomes understandable, and it is applicable. The parable illustrates the relationship between God and his people. The gospel parables give practical advice on such matters as faith, good works, forgiveness, and prayer. The parable is not intended to have a hidden meaning, contrary to what much of the church history has done by extensive allegorical interpretation. But rather it is to illustrate. Its purpose is to clarify, to make something understood better, and to emphasize a point using vocabulary of everyday life. Thus, the message Jesus preached was not esoteric, but was quite practical in nature. For the most part, scholars have tended to ignore the significance of the twin parables, although many have recognized, or some have recognized, that twin parables do exist. For example, Joachim Jeremias, an early 20th century German scholar, in his book, The Parables of Jesus, noted that we find in the Synoptic Gospels a large number of paired parables and similes. These, he stated, are the same ideas expressed in different symbols. He believed that Jesus' mother's tongue was Aramaic, but he did note that Dahlman and Birkeland claimed that Jesus spoke Hebrew. He also pointed out the many Semitisms in the Greek texts of the Gospels, and he contended that, at least in many parables, we have the literal words of Jesus. Jeremiah also understood the importance of getting to the original historical situation in attempting to understand the parables. George Buttrick, an authority on the parables as well, he related Jesus' parables to everyday life. He stated that Jesus frequently used twin parables in his book, The Parables of Jesus. He gave several examples of twin parables, and he even makes a statement, and I quote, "Though they are separated in Luke's gospel and assigned to different occasions, it seems that they were originally spoken in uninterrupted sequence. The one story reiterates the truth of the other," end quote. Lindsay contends in an article in Jerusalem Perspective that had Buttrick carried out his suggestion further, he might have concluded that Matthew and Luke have preserved not only twin parables, but also other parts of complete stories about Jesus, and that now these separated elements can be restored to their original sequences. Another scholar, C.H. Dodd, in The Parables of the Kingdom, also saw some connection between pairs of parables and even used the term twin parables. For example, when speaking of the parables of the tower builder and the king going to war. But he used this idea in a very limited way. In fact, Lindsay wondered why he didn't follow his insight more fully, and his conclusion was that it was probably due to his reliance on German critics. In a Bible study, one day Lindsay raised the question as to what is the purpose of partner parables? Why two? One of the students, a Jerusalem resident, explained, "It might be because in the Torah it is written, by the mouth," meaning testimony, "of 2 or 3 witnesses a thing will be established," from Deuteronomy 19:15. By having 2 witnesses, the word is confirmed. This apparently was a way for Jesus to indicate that his teaching was God's truth. Examples in the Hebrew scripture include, for example, Gideon asking God for 2 signs in Judges 6:36-40, and the twin dreams of Pharaoh in Genesis 41, verse 25 and verse 32. Joseph explains the meaning and states, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same, and the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the matter is absolutely settled by God and that God will soon bring it about." Another possible purpose can be seen in some parables where the truth remains the same, but there's a change in emphasis. Perhaps one listener might identify with one parable, while another might more readily identify with the second. A good example of this would be the twin parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin, 2 parables that are actually situated next to each other and are very clearly seen as the same theme, but 2 stories that perhaps relate better to different people, perhaps one to a man and one to a woman. The Mary and Martha incident provides a clear example of Jesus' teaching method. The gospel writers generally alert us that an incident is about to take place with the phrase, "it occurred," or "it happened." It's often translated, "now it came to pass." In Luke 10:38-42, we read, "Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him to her home. Her sister Mary seated herself at the Lord's feet to listen to his teaching. But Martha was irritated because of all the preparations that had to be made. And she went to him and said, 'Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me.' And Jesus answering said to her, 'Martha, Martha, you are worried and disturbed about many things. Only one thing is important. Mary has chosen what is better, and what she has chosen will not be taken from her.'" We can be quite sure that this situation occurred in Bethany, since we read in the Gospel of John that Mary and Martha made their home in that village. Evidently, Martha was preparing food for a number of people, perhaps quite a large group who had come with Jesus. What was the better? What was the best? The fact that Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to his teaching. During the Second Temple period, to sit at the feet of a sage meant to be a student, a disciple of that sage, to learn from him. Jesus, however, he identified Martha's problem, and that was the problem of being worried, anxious, disturbed, troubled about many things. He identified correctly that this was what was bothering her, that she was a person who worried and was anxious. Now, a key term that I've put in bold italics here is the word worried. This term, which provides us with the theme of these passages, appears several times in a teaching by Jesus on anxiety in Matthew 6:25-34 and the parallel of Luke 12:22-31. So we'll read this. The first one was the incident, and now we're looking at the discourse, the teaching. Then he said to his disciples, I tell you, do not be worried about your life, literally your soul, what you will have to eat and drink. What about your body, what you will have to wear? Isn't the life, the soul, more than food, or the body than clothes? Look at the birds. They don't sow or reap or store in granaries, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you more valuable than they are? Can any of you add a single cubit to your height by worrying? The key word in bold, again, connects the preceding, and it will connect the succeeding passage as Jesus addresses the issue of anxiety. The term worry connects this teaching with the incident in which he identified Mary's problem. The two words in bold, you have store and granaries, are key words to connect the parables that will follow. The word soul, with its various Hebrew connotations, also serves to connect the passages. And why are you worried about clothing? See how the wildflowers grow? They don't work to make their clothes. I tell you, even Solomon in all his splendor was not dressed like one of these. If this is how God clothes grass in the fields, which is here today and tomorrow is used to stoke an oven, how much more can he be expected to clothe you, O ye of little faith? So don't be worried asking, what are we going to eat or drink, or what are we going to wear? For the heathen chased after these things. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But more than anything else, desire the kingdom of heaven and his salvation, literally righteousness, which is a synonym for, in Hebrew, for salvation. And all these things will be yours as well. So don't be worried about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Here we see the key word worry brought out several times throughout this teaching as Jesus illustrates the Father's love as he provides for his creation. So we can see a very clear connection between what Jesus identified in the incident as Martha's problem, and here in the teaching that has to do with not being concerned about or overly concerned about material things, because the Father even takes care of the flowers and the birds and all of his creation. Now let's look at a couple of parables. In Luke 12:16-20, we have the parable of the rich fool. The field of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my grain. This is what I will do, he said. I will tear down my granaries and build bigger ones, and in them I will store all my grain and goods. Then I will say to myself, literally to my soul, you have enough goods laid aside to last you many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, tonight you will die. Literally, your soul will be demanded from you. Then who will have what you have prepared? Now this is the first of the twin parables and is connected to the teaching by the key words store, granaries, and goods. The term soul, seen here in two of its Hebrew meanings, also serves to connect this parable with the teaching that we read in the passage above. So what about another parable? And I think that My father loved to try to pull these parables together and see if he could find anything that will match up. And here he found a beautiful one, the rich man and Lazarus, in Luke 16:19 to 31. I'll read it from here. There once was a rich man. He dressed in purple and fine linen and feasted sumptuously every day. A poor man named Lazarus used to be placed at his gate. He was covered with sores, and as he lay there longing for a few scraps that fell from the rich man's table, the dogs would come and lick his open sores. Finally, the poor man died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was tormented, he saw in the distance Abraham with Lazarus in his bosom. "Father Abraham," he cried out, "have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham said, "My son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things," literally goods, "while Lazarus received bad things. So now he is here being comforted, and you are in agony. And besides, between us is a great chasm that has been firmly fixed, so that those who want to cross from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross from there to us. Then I beg you, Father," he said, "to send Lazarus to my family, because I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will also come to this and not come to this place of torment." But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone comes back from the dead." So in this second parable, we have a theme similar to the one we encountered in the story of the rich fool. Here's a man who has an overabundance of material goods. He did not share his abundance with Lazarus, a man in extreme need. So when life was over, the poor man received God's mercy and love, his chesed, and the unnamed man who was concerned only for himself and did not follow God's rule in life suffered the consequences and had no recourse. Without the long context in this reconstruction of the story of Mary and Martha, we seem to have an incomplete passage. We would not perhaps understand what the one thing that Mary chose that would not be taken from her really entailed. But by combining the passages on the basis of theme and keywords, we see that the one thing that we should desire is God's rule and salvation in our lives. Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet. She chose to follow him. She chose to learn as much as she could about the things that mattered most in life. What Martha did was not wrong. Jesus never put her down. She was doing, and the rabbis taught a lot about hearing and doing. Doing was very important. Following what God has prescribed as far as caring about other people, providing for them, being very hospitable. She was a hospitable person and probably was serving many, many people. He didn't put down any of those things that she was doing. But he did point out that Mary had chosen the better. The most important thing, however, seems to be that he realized that her problem was being anxious, overly concerned, overly anxious about material things, about everyday things, about things that he provides, that he would provide for the needs, and so perhaps even it wasn't a very big a matter at that point, but it was a wonderful way to make a stepping off point for Jesus to go into a whole discourse about how God provides and cares for each one of his children, for every one of his creation, not even just humanity. He shows us through the way he provides for his creation as a whole. But this is to show that he will provide if we, first of all, look after the things of the soul, the things that matter. Follow his teaching. All the other will be provided as well. The one thing then, which is not brought out in the story if you don't go ahead and carry it on, is that we desire God's rule and his salvation in our lives and not overly concerned with everyday material aspects of life. So let's summarize this way of teaching. The above passages were taken from different parts of the Gospels, but were very easily, well, not easily, I guess, for most people since centuries past, and not very many have connected it, though there have been some that have made some connections. But yet, if you look at the words, and I think especially when you become Hebrew scholars and start translating from Greek into Hebrew and really look closely at all of these words and compare them, I think it will become even more obvious. As well as this is just one example, we have many other examples, and if you're interested in doing more, go on JerusalemPerspective.com and you can see many other examples and check it out for yourself. And some of them you'll think, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't seem to fit in here, but maybe something else will. And it's all a way of trying to continually study and learn, what is God telling us? What is the truth that he's trying to bring forth? And how can we better know Jesus? How can we better understand his words? That's our whole quest, is to continually understand what he's trying to tell us by the way he interacted with the people that he was with from day to day in the incidents that occurred, as we see the teaching, and as we connect parables and realize that parables are not hidden truths, that we're to go and look at the early church fathers and see what kind of hidden truth did they find. How did they allegorize all these? We need to try to get at Jesus in his context and realize that he was speaking to the everyday person. He was concerned about everyday things, and he was speaking to things that concern any person. It's not something hidden that is for somebody in the future to try to unravel and get some secret knowledge. In this example, we had the incident, the Mary and Martha story, the key word worried. We had the teaching, the discourse, being anxious about material things, and the key words worried, soul, store, granaries, and connecting the word worried with the incident, connecting then the word soul, store, and granaries with the parable of the rich fool, the key words there being soul, store, and granaries, and finally the rich man and Lazarus, and the connection there with goods. And actually under rich fool we should add the word goods, because that was also in that section as well. So the rich man and Lazarus connects it with goods, and we can also see that by the theme of what he was speaking about. So I just wanted to give you a little brief example of one of the incident teaching and twin parables that were connected following Robert Lindsay's idea of taking the text and kind of looking at it, trying to get behind what text we have today to what, as close as possible, we could understand what Jesus might have been speaking to in the context of the land, the people, the language, and hopefully you'll take this and then go and search yourself, read again and again the Gospels, read the various stories and the parables, and see that they have a purpose, and perhaps we can even understand more of what God's trying to tell us by Jesus showing us God, showing us the truth and the faith, so that we can understand what God's purposes were, so that we can draw closer to God through Jesus Christ and through his words and through his activities. So thank you very much.